Growth is a good thing, and you can see growth in everything all the way from people to space. Today we'll be looking at growth in people, countries, and wealth. Growth allows more opportunities and wealth to be distributed. Sometimes using metrics like GDP can take away from what the regular people in a country experience today. That's why you must look at unemployment rates, poverty rates, and average household income. That's why we're here today to look at the fastest growing countries in the world, and if that economic growth is experienced by everyone in the country. Before we begin our video, be sure to hit the like button to help us out. We're excited to share 10 of the fastest growing countries in the world. Now, here are 10 cities that make our list. Number 10. Saudi Arabia. For our first stop, we're going to be heading to Saudi Arabia, home of Mecca. The country stands currently at a GDP of $793 billion, with an estimated annual growth rate of 2.9%. They also boast a population of 34.3 million people, with an annual growth rate of 1.6%. This means the overall wealth and population of the country will be growing substantially in the years to come. Does the everyday life of the population reflect this growth, though? Sadly not, with a poverty rate of 12.7 and an unemployment rate of 11.3. That's not the only problem, though. The average annual household income is 14.9 thousand Saudi riyals, which comes out to less than $4,000 a year. This is a massive problem, and hopefully with the country's economic growth comes the opportunity for everyday people in the country to gain wealth as well. Even though the country doesn't have a normal distribution of wealth to its citizens, the country is still growing at an astounding rate. Let's just hope they help all of their citizens with this growth. Number 9. Brazil. Now we're going to be heading to Brazil, a place you probably didn't expect to see on this list. Brazil has a GDP of $1.88 trillion, with an estimated annual growth rate of 2.1%, and a population of 211 million people, with an estimated growth rate of 0.7%. Both are somewhat low rates compared to what we'll be seeing, but Brazil is known for having extreme phases of growth and decline. Even though the country has seen huge economic growth in the past decades, a majority of the regular citizens have not seen the fruits of that growth. For instance, the average annual household income for the country is less than $5,000. Their unemployment rate is 13.6%, and their poverty rate is 19.6%. All of those statistics are insane for a country that's supposed to see substantial growth in the next decade. They might be bad numbers, but considering where the country was at in the previous decades, things are getting better. And if the country continues to grow in population, and with their economy, these stats could be significantly lower. There's still more potential for Brazil, and that's why it's here on the list. Number 8. South Korea. We're going to one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, at number 8, with South Korea. They have a GDP of $1.65 trillion, with the growth rate in the last decades being 5.4%, and with a population of 51.7 million people, they grow annually at a rate of 0.1%. While their economy is growing substantially, their population's growth is almost stagnant. But that only makes it more impressive. With a population that low and a GDP that high, South Korea is doing something right. This is the first country on the list where you start to see the economic growth of the country reflected in its residents. They have an unemployment rate of 5.7%, a poverty rate of 16.7%, and an average annual household income of around $25,000 a year. The average annual income may not be high, but the unemployment rate is low enough that a good majority of the citizens secure a job. The only problem is what the average job pays. With this growth comes investment. Many countries look at South Korea as technologically advanced, and that reputation has benefited them. Hopefully, the growth of the country continues to reflect the growth in quality of life for the citizens. Number 7. Thailand. At number 7, we're going to Thailand, a beautiful country with a growing industry. Thailand has a GDP of $544 billion, with a growth rate of 3.5%, a population of 69.6 million, and a growth rate of 0.3%. The GDP is very high for the population of the country, which means there's some sort of economic boom happening in the country. Thailand is notorious for having income equality problems, but let's leave the rumors aside and look at the stats. They have an unemployment rate of 2.25% and a poverty rate of 6.2%. Both of these numbers are extremely low, but the next stat is what really throws this off. The average household's annual income is around $3,700 a year. This shows that there may not be mass unemployment or poverty, but there is a huge problem of workers being underpaid. There's been a trend towards millionaires growing in Thailand, with the country reaching 81,000 millionaires in 2022. Sadly, people are not being paid fairly within the country, but with an unemployment and poverty rate that low, the country can turn this around and build their middle class. Number 6. Japan. The next country is another tech giant on the world stage, and it is Japan. Japan has a GDP of 5.06 trillion with a growth rate of 1%, a population of 126 million people, and a population decline rate of 0.3%. You heard it correctly. The population is on the decline. But with a population that large in a country of that size, population growth is difficult. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty stats of the country. Japan has an unemployment rate of 2.97%, a poverty rate of 15.4%, and an average annual household income of around $30,000 a year. This shows that the country is not growing at the expense of the people, but with the people. The average life expectancy in the country is around 84 years old, which shows that the people get to experience the fruits of the country's growth, and that Japan treats its citizens right. Opportunity and quality of life will continue to grow in Japan with their economic growth. With all these stats, Japan certainly belongs on this list. We're now halfway through our video. We hope you're enjoying learning about the fastest growing countries in the world. We still have 5 more videos to go, so stay with us. Number 5. China. For number 5, we're going to the most populated country in the world, China. China has a GDP of $14.3 trillion, with a growth rate of 2.3%, a population of 1.4 billion people, and a growth rate of 0.3%. The country is notorious for its population control, with limits on the number of children parents are allowed to have, and their very shady business practices that allow the theft of ideas. Now we're going to take a look at the facts that really matter. The unemployment rate is 5.1%, a poverty rate of 0.6%, and an average annual household income of around $8,000 a year. These numbers can be misleading though. For instance, China's definition of living in poverty is having less than $2.30 in your pocket every day, which is a very low standard, but getting the actual numbers is near impossible due to their unwillingness to be real and release the actual numbers. I think it's safe to say that a vast majority of China's population will not experience the benefits of the economic growth that China experiences, but that economic growth is still there regardless, and that's why it's on the list. Number 4. Singapore. Another futuristic country landed on this list with Singapore at our number 4. Singapore's GDP is at $374 billion, with a growth rate of 3%, and a population of 5.7 million, with a growth rate of 0.79%. Both numbers are extremely impressive when you realize that Singapore is a small island state that's basically just one city. Here are the important stats. Singapore has an unemployment rate of 3.5%, a poverty rate of around 10%, and an average annual household income of around $7,700 a year. The poverty rate isn't bad, but like other countries on this list, the country suffers from generally unfair pay. We know this because there's extreme wealth in the city-state, but it's not distributed very well, with the middle and lower class being left behind in this economic growth. I would say that we're starting to see a trend, with a lot of these countries that are growing at an alarming rate, only having their upper class grow and their middle and lower classes continuing to suffer. Singapore is on this list for its economic growth, and hopefully it works on improving its quality of life for all its citizens. Number 3. Egypt. At our number 3 spot, we're going to the home of the pyramids, Egypt. Egypt's GDP is at $303 billion, with a growth rate of 3.6%, and their population is 100 million, with a growth rate of 1.9%. Both of those are good numbers and good growth, but we still need to look at the other stats to get the full picture. The country's unemployment rate is at 10.4%, the poverty rate is at 29.7%, and the average annual household income is $26,000 a year. This is a classic example of how averages can go wrong. With poverty rates this high in a country this rich, something must be off. It's the amount of wealth of the upper class being such an extreme that it cancels out the lower numbers, making the average look normal. We can see that Egypt has problems with unemployment and paying its workers fairly. This is all evidence that Egypt might be growing, but it seems to be leaving most of its citizens behind. But that doesn't mean that Egypt isn't growing, it's just not growing most healthily. Number 2. India. At our number 2 spot, we're heading to one of the most crowded countries in the world, India. India's GDP is $2.87 trillion, with a growth rate of 13.7% and a population of 1.37 billion, with a growth rate of 1% annually. These numbers are massive and should not be taken lightly. From these numbers alone, you can tell India will be a titan of growth in the next decade. But let's see if this growth has also benefited the Indian population. India's unemployment rate is 8%, the poverty rate is 20.8%, and the average salary is about $3,000 a year. Again, unemployment is not the problem here, but pay. But in a country where you hold more than a tenth of the world's population, there are going to be big problems, like China. The good news is that all of these statistics have been improving over the last decades, so India might eventually get these numbers to normal levels. Obviously, India has problems, but the sheer enormity of the country's growth is inarguable, and that's why it takes the number 2 spot on this list. You're nearly at the end of our video. Which country do you think will take the #1 spot? We're on a mission to explore all of Earth's amazing destinations. Make sure you're subscribed. That way you'll always be notified of our latest videos. Number 1. United Arab Emirates. For our #1 spot, we have the country with the tallest building in the world and some of the richest people, the United Arab Emirates, or the UAE. The GDP is $421 billion, with a growth rate of 1.7%, and a population of 9.77 million, with a growth rate of 1.2% annually. Crazy numbers are only going to increase as more investments from foreign businesses pour into the country. You should know that the UAE is famous for its absurdly rich princes, so it should come as no surprise that most of the people living in the country are not princes. They have an unemployment rate of 5%, a poverty rate of 19.5%, and an average household income of around $5,000. You can see that the rest of the country is not prospering as much as the upper class of the country. This all does not take away from the fact that the UAE has grown so much in the last decades, and it will continue to do so, whether it brings the entire country or just the investors and princes. Hey, thanks for watching. Want to suggest a video or have something to say? Let us know in the comments section below. Check out our countries playlist for more videos like this one.